Hello again. I'm Patsy Thompson, and today I'm going to show you how to stitch a more complex machine embroidered applique design that requires more than 2 hoopings. Bird blocks make wonderful quilt blocks, and today we'll be stitching this particular bird block as our example. It's really beautiful, and you're probably thinking this would be really hard to do, but it's not. If you look closely at it, there are 22 separate applique pieces held on this 15-inch square block, but I'll be showing you just how easy it is to create a block like this one by using easy-to-align registration guidelines. This exact same technique will work for many of our other bird block designs, so this tutorial will help you stitch out a number of our embroidered applique designs. Let's get to the fusing table in the machine and we'll get started. I begin by hooping one layer of medium weight cutaway stabilizer. I place this into the machine without any fabric layer, and the machine stitches out registration lines that will mark the center lines of the quilt block. I've already stabilized my 15-inch fabric block by fusing interfacing to the back side, and you'll notice that I've drawn a line with a soap sliver from each corner of the block to the opposite corner. This is how to mark a block when you want to set your block on point. Notice also that the point of intersection is the dead center of the block. You will need straight pins with flat heads, as well as foam pin anchors for this next step. These are basic supplies that control the alignment from hoop to hoop, so you'll want to keep these on hand for future machine embroidery applique work as well. To orient my fabric block perfectly on my hoop, I work from beneath the stabilizer and place a straight pin through the dead center of the stabilizer center crosshair, and then I pierce the dead center of my fabric block. I push it all the way up so the pin lays flat against the stabilizer, and I then place a pin anchor flat against the fabric, as this will hold my placement pin in place and allow me to have the use of both of my hands as I continue to work with my hoop. The fact that my pins have a flat head allows me to lay the hoop flat on the table as I work, so avoid using any pin that doesn't have a truly flat head. Working from underneath the stabilizer, I place a second pin through one of my stitched lines, and then I make sure I pierce my fabric block right through my drawn soap line. Once I've assured myself that my fabric lays flat and my pin stands straight up, I place a pin anchor on this pin as well. I repeat this same process for a third and fourth point on my lines as well. These pin anchors you see me using are small pieces of foam. If you can't fashion these from objects around your own home, then visit our online store and enter Patsy's pin anchors into the search box. Unfortunately, the Pinmore brand of pin anchors will not work for you in this application because they are too dense. Now that my block is perfectly oriented, I place a few pins to anchor my block and keep it stable during embroidery. Notice that I'm very careful about the placement of these pins, and I only place them in areas that I know will be out of the way of the presser foot. Always look at the embroidery machine screen to see what will be stitched and where it will be stitched to determine where the presser foot will be traveling, and then deliberately place your pins away from these areas. I can now remove my original 4 placement pins and pin anchors, and notice that as I remove each pin anchor, I stabilize the hoop beneath me before I pull that foam pin anchor away. This is important because you want to avoid any undue stress on the hoop. I can now return the hoop to the machine. The machine then stitches 3 new registration crosshairs that we'll use to align the second hooping, as well as stitching the placement outlines for each bird and each headdress. I place the hoop onto my ironing surface and then fuse my bird shape and plume headdress shapes into place, taking care to fuse them just inside the placement outlines. I use my Clover mini iron for this process because it allows me to fuse with precision. To cut these applique shapes, I used the Applique Cuts Bird Simpler Fancy die and the Plume family die. As we come out with more and more blocks, you'll see that these die shapes will be repeated again and again in different block designs. The hoop is returned to the machine, and the edges of the birds are finished with this pretty scallop edge. The edges of the headdress are finished with a different design. The machine then stitches the placement outline for the internal wings, and I fuse those internal wings into place. Once the decorative stitching is done on the internal wing and headdress, I remove the hoop from the machine and cut away the excess stabilizer. Again, notice that I can cut this stabilizer away quickly and easily by simply advancing a slightly open pair of child's blunt-tip scissors just outside the stitching line. Notice that I deliberately avoid cutting anything near the crosshairs because I need those 3 crosshairs to line up with the stabilizer on my next hooping. I placed a fresh sheet of medium cutaway stabilizer on the hoop and returned it to the machine where 3 registration crosshairs were stitched onto the stabilizer. We will use these to align our quilt block perfectly for the next sequence of stitching. Again, working from below the stabilizer, I place a flathead pen through the dead center of one crosshair, and then I pierce the dead center of the corresponding crosshair on the fabric block. I place one of my foam pin anchors through the pin to stabilize it, and then I do the same thing with the second and third crosshairs. Once my fabric block has been anchored in this way, I place a few pins to stabilize it during the embroidery process, again very deliberately placing them only in areas where the presser foot will not go. I then remove my pin anchors and the original 3 placement pins, and I return the hoop to the embroidery machine. After the machine stitches 2 new crosshairs that will help us align it in the third hooping, it will stitch the placement outlines for all the pieces of the large tulip that will emerge from the top of the stem. It will then stitch the placement outline for the stem itself. All of these shapes were cut from the Applique Cuts Stylized Stem 2 die as well as the tulips die. You'll be seeing these shapes in all kinds of blocks to come. The stem and tulip are fused into place, and notice that the tulip pieces are fused in a very specific order. First, the narrow edge of the tulip is fused exactly on its placement outline, and then the ovoid tulip shape is placed, and in order to follow its placement outline, that shape overlaps the narrow edge piece just a bit. Lastly, the outer petals are fused. This order is the same for both the large and small sizes of tulips. Once all applique pieces have been fused in place, the hoop is returned to the machine. The machine finishes the edges of the large tulip, and then it finishes the edges of the stem. It will then return to the stem to decorate it with some internal designs to really make it pop. This block is really starting to take shape now. We remove the block from the hoop and trim the excess stabilizer from the back side. I then place a fresh sheet of stabilizer onto the hoop, and the machine stitches 2 new alignment crosshairs onto the stabilizer. Just as before, I begin from below the stabilizer and place a pin through the dead center of the first crosshair and then through the dead center of the corresponding crosshair on the fabric block. This pin is then stabilized with a foam pin anchor. I do the same thing for the second crosshair, and then I place a few pins to stabilize the block during embroidery. I remove my pin anchors and original 2 holding pins, and it's time to return this hoop to the machine. The machine has stitched the placement outlines for the tail feathers and small tulips on one side of the stem, so we can now fuse those into place. Notice that the small tulips are fused in the exact same order as the large tulip pieces were fused. Once done, the hoop is returned to the machine. The edges of the tulip are finished first, and then the edges of the tail feathers are finished with a different decorative stitch. The machine will then begin working on the internal plume designs. Now really we're getting enough detail on this block now that the design is getting really exciting. Once done, the block is removed from the machine and the excess stabilizer is removed. I hooped a fresh piece of stabilizer and the machine stitched a new pair of crosshairs for the fourth and final hooping. Just as before, I used placement pins and pin anchors to line up the crosshairs on the stabilizer with the crosshairs on the fabric block. Once done, the hoop is returned to the machine for the final stitching. Now, was that so hard? We did do 4 separate hoopings, but they were easy to line up just perfectly, and at the end of the day, we got a beautiful machine-embroidered applique bird block. The shapes alone are enticing, but the embroidery really takes it up over the top. So don't let yourself be intimidated by multiple hoopings. The secret is in learning how easy it is to align the block again and again. If you're interested in this bird block design or any of our machine embroidered applique designs, please visit our website at patsythompsondesigns.com and keep checking back because we're coming out with more designs all the time. If you have a burning question, shoot me an email at patsy@patsythompsondesigns.com. So long for now.